The water came for Katherine Abernathy's cabin in the dead of night, a roaring beast awakened by 3 days of relentless rain that transformed the gentle creek behind her property into a ravenous monster. She jolted awake to the sound of splintering wood as the floor beneath her bed buckled and water surged through the cracks, cold and unforgiving in the spring of 1882. Katherine scrambled from her bed, nightgown instantly soaked as she waded through knee-deep water. The cabin, built by her late father's hands 5 years prior, groaned around her like a dying animal. Just 22 years old and alone for less than a year since her father's passing, she had never imagined the modest stream that had provided such peaceful companionship would betray her so violently. "Sweet, merciful heaven," she gasped, reaching for the wooden box containing her mother's locket and the deed to the land, the only valuables she possessed. The water was rising with alarming speed, already at her thighs as she clutched the box to her chest. The thunder of rushing water drowned her scream as the rear wall of the cabin surrendered to the flood's fury, collapsing inward with a deafening crack. The current knocked Katherine off her feet, the box flying from her grasp as she desperately clawed for purchase against the merciless pull. Her fingers found the edge of the kitchen table, momentarily anchoring her as water swirled around her chest. Outside, the night was chaos, rain still falling in sheets, the creek now a raging river that consumed everything in its path. The land Katherine had known since childhood was transforming before her eyes, becoming an unfamiliar and hostile wilderness. The cabin gave another tortured groan, the foundation shifting beneath the water's assault. Katherine knew she had moments before the structure collapsed entirely. Her mind raced with the terrible clarity that comes in moments of true danger. She needed to reach the roof, perhaps climb to higher ground beyond. But as she struggled toward the ladder to the small attic space, the floor beneath her feet simply disappeared. The current caught her fully then, sweeping her through what remained of her home and into the open floodwaters. Katherine gasped a desperate breath before going under, tumbling through the darkness, disoriented and certain she was about to die. The flood carried her through the night, her body battered against debris, branches, fence posts, parts of what might have been her own cabin. Each time she managed to surface, she screamed for help that couldn't possibly come, not in this remote stretch of land outside Durango, Colorado. Her nearest neighbors were the McPherson family, nearly 2 miles east, and the Pearson Ranch 3 miles south. In this deluge, they would be fighting their own battles against the water's wrath. When her shoulder slammed into something solid, Katherine's fingers instinctively grasped for it, a tree trunk, partially submerged but sturdy enough to halt her deadly journey downstream. She clung to it, coughing water from her lungs, the taste of mud and despair thick on her tongue. Dawn was breaking, a faint grayness seeping into the eastern sky when Katherine heard it, the rhythmic splashing of something moving purposefully through the water. She blinked rain from her eyes, her voice raw as she called out weakly, "Help, please, someone." The figure emerged from the mist like an apparition, a man on horseback, navigating the receding floodwaters with remarkable skill. The horse, a powerful chestnut stallion, pushed steadily through the current, steam rising from its flanks in the cool morning air. "Hold on," the rider called, his voice carrying over the diminishing roar of the waters. He guided his mount toward her with practiced ease, revealing a lean face beneath the brim of a weather-beaten hat. His eyes, sharp and clear, assessed her situation in an instant. Katherine's grip on the tree was failing, her fingers numb from cold and exhaustion. "I can't," she began, but the rest of her words disappeared as her hold slipped and the current began to pull her away once more. In a swift, fluid motion, The horseman was alongside her, strong arms reaching down to grasp her by the shoulders. With seemingly effortless strength, he pulled her from the water and settled her before him in the saddle. She collapsed against his chest, shivering violently, barely registering the warmth of his body or the solid beat of his heart against her back. "I've got you," he said, his voice low and steady near her ear as he wrapped one arm securely around her waist, the other holding the reins. "Your cabin's gone. I saw what was left as I rode through. Flood swallowed it whole." Katherine felt tears mix with the rain on her face. Everything she owned, everything she was, had been carried away by the merciless waters. As if reading her thoughts, the stranger tightened his hold slightly. "I'm Samuel Kincaid," he said, "and I'm your shelter now." Too exhausted to question or protest, Katherine surrendered to the strange security of this man's presence, letting her head rest against his shoulder as he guided the horse through the treacherous terrain toward higher ground. Samuel felt the woman go slack against him, her breathing shallow but steady. She was alive, which was more than he'd expected when he'd spotted the remains of the cabin being torn apart by the floodwaters at first light. He'd been riding since before dawn, checking the lower pastures of the Diamond K Ranch where he worked as foreman, when he'd seen the destruction downstream. The rain had finally stopped, though dark clouds still hung heavily in the sky. Samuel knew they needed to find proper shelter soon. The woman in his arms was dangerously cold, her simple nightgown plastered to her skin, hair a sodden mass against his chest. He guided his horse, Rusty, along a ridge that would lead them to higher ground and eventually to the main house of the Diamond K. "Miss," he said, trying to rouse her. "I need you to stay awake. What's your name?" She stirred slightly. "Katherine," she murmured. "Katherine Abernathy." "Miss Abernathy," Samuel repeated. "You're going to be all right. The ranch is about 2 miles from here. We've got a warm fire and dry clothes waiting." Her eyes fluttered open, revealing a startling shade of green that caught Samuel off guard. Despite her bedraggled state, he could see she was beautiful, fine features, a determined set to her jaw even in exhaustion. "My father's land," she said, her voice stronger now. "The deed." "We'll worry about that later," Samuel assured her. "Right now, we need to get you warm and dry." As they rode, the landscape revealed the flood's devastation. Fields were underwater, fences destroyed, livestock stranded on patches of higher ground. The creek that normally defined the eastern boundary of Diamond K property had swollen to 10 times its usual width, cutting off access to several pastures. "It's all gone, isn't it?" Katherine asked quietly. Samuel didn't believe in false comfort. "The cabin looked pretty destroyed, madam. But land stays where you left it, even after a flood. Once the waters recede, we can assess the damage properly." She nodded against his chest, a small gesture of acknowledgement that tugged unexpectedly at his heart. In his 30 years, Samuel had seen his share of hardship and loss. Orphaned at 12, he'd worked his way up from stable boy to ranch foreman through sheer determination and an almost supernatural affinity with horses. He recognized the resilience in this woman, even in her weakened state. The Diamond K ranch house came into view as they crested a hill, a substantial 2-story structure of solid timber with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, promising warmth within. Several hands were visible in the yard, securing loose items and checking buildings for damage. "Samuel," called Elijah Grant, the ranch owner, from the porch. The older man's eyes widened at the sight of Katherine. "What in tarnation?" "Found her downstream, Mr. Grant," Samuel replied, carefully dismounting while supporting Katherine. "Her cabin was destroyed in the flood, Miss Katherine Abernathy." Elijah's wife, Martha, appeared beside her husband, her kind face creasing with concern. "Bring her inside immediately, Samuel. The poor dear is half drowned." Samuel lifted Katherine into his arms, her weight barely registering as he carried her up the porch steps. She stirred against him, those green eyes finding his face once more. "Thank you," she whispered, the words barely audible. Something shifted in Samuel's chest, something he hadn't felt in a very long time, perhaps never. He nodded curtly, uncomfortable with the sensation. Inside, Martha took charge with practiced efficiency, directing Samuel to place Katherine on the settee near the blazing fire. "Fetch my spare nightgown from the upstairs trunk, Samuel, and then make yourself scarce while we get her changed." As Samuel climbed the stairs to retrieve the requested clothing, he found himself hoping that the mysterious Katherine Abernathy wouldn't be returning to her land too quickly. The thought surprised him, and he pushed it aside with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to keeping his emotions tightly controlled. Little did he know that the floodwaters had not only destroyed Katherine's home, but had also set in motion currents that would alter both their lives irrevocably. Katherine awoke disoriented, surrounded by unfamiliar floral-patterned wallpaper and the soft comfort of a real bed. For a moment, she thought she might be dreaming, but the ache in her muscles and the soreness in her throat confirmed the reality of the previous night's ordeal. She was alive bewilderingly, miraculously alive. She sat up slowly, taking inventory of herself and her surroundings. She wore a flannel nightgown several sizes too large, her hair had been brushed and braided, and the bed she occupied was in a modestly appointed but clean bedroom. Morning light filtered through lace curtains, revealing a washstand, dresser, and rocking chair, the latter occupied by a plump, gray-haired woman who had dozed off, knitting still in her hands. As if sensing Katherine's gaze, the woman's eyes opened, and she smiled warmly. "Oh good, you're awake. I'm Martha Grant. You're at the Diamond K Ranch." The memories rushed back: the flood, the desperate fight for survival, and the man on horseback who had appeared like a guardian angel. "Samuel," Katherine said, her voice still rough. "He saved my life." Martha nodded, setting aside her knitting and moving to pour water from a pitcher into a glass. "That he did. Samuel's got a sixth sense about trouble. He was out checking the lower pastures at dawn when he spotted what was left of your cabin." She handed Katherine the water. "Small sips now." Katherine obeyed, the cool water soothing her raw throat. "How long have I been asleep?" "About 18 hours, dear. It's morning again. You needed the rest after what you went through." Katherine's eyes widened. 18 hours. "I need to get back to my land, see what's left." Martha placed a gentle but firm hand on her arm. "Not just yet. The doctor rode out yesterday and said you need at least another day of rest. Mild hypothermia and exhaustion, not to mention those cuts and bruises." For the first time, Katherine noticed the bandages on her hands and the tender spots on her arms and legs. "I don't remember getting these." "The flood wasn't gentle with you," Martha said with gentle understatement. "Now, how about some breakfast?" "I've got flapjacks keeping warm and some fresh coffee." Katherine's stomach growled in response, prompting a smile from Martha. "I'll take that as a yes. There's a robe on the hook there and slippers beside the bed. The washroom is just down the hall to your right. Join us in the kitchen when you're ready." With that, Martha gathered her knitting and left, giving Katherine space to collect herself. Alone, Katherine allowed herself a moment of grief. Everything was gone: the cabin her father had built with such care, the small garden she'd tended, her mother's locket with the only remaining image of her parents together. She closed her eyes against the wave of despair threatening to overwhelm her. "Not everything," she whispered to herself. "You're alive. The land is still there. Her father had always told her that as long as you had breath in your lungs and ground beneath your feet, you could rebuild anything. After using the facilities and washing her face, Katherine found her way to the kitchen, where the heavenly aroma of coffee and maple syrup greeted her. Martha stood at the stove, while an older gentleman, presumably Mr. Grant, sat at the table reading a newspaper. "Ah, here she is," the man said, standing politely. "Elijah Grant, madam, welcome to our home." "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Grant," Katherine replied. "I'm sorry to impose." "Nonsense," Martha interjected, placing a steaming plate of flapjacks on the table. "Sit and eat. You need your strength." As Katherine took a seat, the kitchen door opened, and Samuel Kincaid entered, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. Their eyes met, and for a moment the kitchen seemed to fade away. In the light of day, Katherine could truly see her rescuer, tall and lean, with shoulders broadened by years of hard work, dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck, and eyes the color of a summer sky. A scar ran along his jawline, adding character to a face that might otherwise have been too handsome. "Miss Abernathy," he said with a nod. "Good to see you up and about." "Mr. Kincaid," she replied, suddenly acutely aware of her borrowed nightgown and robe. "I haven't properly thanked you for saving my life." A shadow of discomfort crossed his features. "No thanks needed, madam. Anyone would have done the same." "Not anyone could have navigated those floodwaters on horseback," Elijah commented, admiration clear in his voice. "Samuel here is the best horseman in 3 counties." Samuel shrugged off the compliment, accepting a cup of coffee from Martha. "I rode out to what's left of your property this morning, Miss Abernathy. The waters have receded somewhat. I'm afraid there's not much left of your cabin." Katherine swallowed hard, nodding. "I suspected as much. Was there? Did you happen to see a small wooden box? It would have had my mother's locket inside and the deed to the land." Samuel's expression softened slightly. "No, madam, but once the water drops further, we can search more thoroughly." "I'll help," she said firmly. "As soon as possible." "You'll help when the doctor says you're fit," Martha corrected, setting a plate in front of Samuel. "Now eat, both of you. Samuel, you need to get those fence lines checked before noon." Katherine watched as Samuel obediently began to eat, his movements efficient, like a man accustomed to taking sustenance rather than enjoying it. She felt a strange connection to this quiet man who had risked his life to save hers. There was a story behind those guarded blue eyes, she was certain. After breakfast, against Martha's protests, Katherine insisted on helping with the dishes. "I can't just sit idle," she explained. "Work keeps the mind from dwelling on things it shouldn't." Martha gave her an appraising look. "Your father raised you well." "He did," Katherine agreed, a lump forming in her throat. "After my mother passed when I was 12, it was just the 2 of us. He taught me everything: how to hunt, fish, tend the garden, even basic carpentry. Said a woman on the frontier needed to be twice as capable as any man." "Smart man," Martha commented, handing Katherine a dish towel. "How long has he been gone?" "Almost a year now. Pneumonia took him last spring." Katherine focused on drying a plate, the familiar task grounding her. The land was everything to him. 20 acres with good water access, or so we thought. She laughed bitterly. "He always said that creek was a blessing." Martha squeezed her shoulder. "Water gives life and takes it away. That's the way of things out here, but you survived, which means you've got grit." Throughout the day, Katherine rested, ate, and helped with small chores around the kitchen, careful not to overexert herself. Each time Samuel passed by the window or through the house, her eyes followed him, noting the quiet authority with which he directed the ranch hands and the gentle way he handled the horses. By evening, Dr. Wilson returned to check on her, pronouncing her recovery remarkable, but insisting on at least one more day of rest before attempting to return to her property. "Your body's been through an ordeal, Miss Abernathy," he explained. "Pushing too hard now could lead to a setback." Katherine reluctantly agreed, though the need to see her land, to begin assessing what could be salvaged, burned within her. That night, she sat on the porch, wrapped in a borrowed shawl, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The flood had reshaped the landscape, leaving behind a strange new topography of debris and mud. The sound of boot steps on the porch planks alerted her to Samuel's presence before he spoke. "Mind if I join you, Miss Abernathy?" She gestured to the empty chair beside her. "Please do." "And it's Katherine." He settled into the chair, his hat in his hands. "Katherine," he repeated as if testing the name. "You can call me Sam, most folks do." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the colors deepen in the sky. "Tell me about your land," Samuel finally said. "Your father's place." Katherine drew a deep breath, finding it easier to talk about than she'd expected. 20 acres along Harper's Creek. My father purchased it from the government 7 years ago. We came from Pennsylvania after my mother died, looking for a fresh start. He chose that spot because of the water access and the view of the mountains. She smiled at the memory. He said the Rockies reminded him of my mother, beautiful and enduring. Samuel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Land means something different out here. It's not just property. It's identity." "Exactly," Katherine said, surprised by his insight. "The cabin can be rebuilt, but that piece of earth, that's my home, my future." "What will you do now?" he asked. Katherine straightened her shoulders, determination replacing grief. "Rebuild, of course. I'll need to find temporary shelter until I can get a new cabin up." Samuel studied her for a long moment. "That's a lot of work for one person." "I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Kincaid." A faint smile touched his lips. "I don't doubt that, Miss Abernathy. But strength alone won't rebuild a cabin." "Then I'll hire help," she replied, though the practicalities of such an undertaking already troubled her. Her savings were meager, and with the spring planting season approaching, labor would be expensive and scarce. As if reading her thoughts, Samuel said quietly, "The Grants have offered for you to stay here as long as needed, and I know some men who owe me favors good with an axe and saw." Katherine turned to look at him fully, struck by the unexpected offer. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." Samuel's gaze returned to the darkening sky. "Let's just say I understand what it means to lose everything and have to start again." Before she could inquire further, he stood, settling his hat back on his head. "Rest tomorrow as the doctor ordered. Day after, if you're feeling up to it, I'll take you to see your land." As he walked away, Katherine found herself wondering about the story behind Samuel Kincaid's kindness, and why a man so capable and clearly respected remained so guarded. Something told her there was far more to her rescuer than met the eye. 2 days after the flood, true to his word, Samuel arrived at the Grants' house shortly after dawn, leading 2 saddled horses. Katherine was ready, dressed in borrowed clothes from Martha, a simple skirt, blouse, and sturdy boots that were slightly too large but serviceable. "You sure you're up to this?" Martha fretted, pressing a bundle of food into Katherine's hands. "The doctor said to take it easy." "I'm fine, Martha, truly," Katherine assured her. "I need to see my land." Samuel helped her mount a gentle mare named Daisy, his hands strong and sure at her waist. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through Katherine, which she quickly attributed to her still recovering state. They rode in companionable silence, Samuel occasionally pointing out landmarks or explaining how the flood had altered the familiar terrain. As they approached what had been her property, Katherine steeled herself for the devastation. Nothing could have prepared her for the reality. Where her cabin had stood was now nothing but mud and scattered debris. The creek had carved a new path through her garden, leaving behind a tangle of uprooted vegetables and topsoil. Trees that had provided shade and windbreak lay toppled, their massive root systems exposed like the veins of some great wounded beast. Katherine dismounted slowly, her legs shaking slightly as she took in the destruction. "Oh," she whispered, the simple syllable containing worlds of grief. Samuel remained respectfully silent, allowing her space to absorb the shock. After several minutes, Katherine straightened her shoulders and began to walk the property, cataloging the damage with practical eyes. Some fence posts remained intact. The well, miraculously, appeared undamaged. The small barn where her father had kept tools was gone, but she spotted some of its contents scattered among the debris. "It could be worse," she said finally, more to herself than to Samuel. He raised an eyebrow. "Could it?" Katherine gestured to the surrounding land. "The soil's still good. The well's intact, and look there, some of my apple saplings survived." She pointed to 3 young trees, bent but not broken by the flood's fury. "My father always said you can rebuild structures, but good land is irreplaceable." Samuel studied her with newfound respect. "Most people would be overcome seeing this." "I don't have that luxury," Katherine replied simply. "This is all I have left." They spent the morning salvaging what they could: tools, cookware, sections of undamaged lumber. Katherine found her father's axe head, the wooden handle gone but the steel still sound. She clutched it to her chest briefly before adding it to their growing pile of recoverable items. "We should look for that box of yours," Samuel suggested as they paused to eat the lunch Martha had packed. "The one with your mother's locket and the deed." Katherine nodded, though hope was fading. It wasn't very large, about the size of a cigar box, with carved flowers on the lid. They searched methodically along what would have been the flood's path, moving downstream from where the cabin had stood. An hour passed with no success, and Katherine was about to suggest they return to their other salvage efforts when Samuel called out from near a tangle of debris caught against a fallen tree. "Is this it?" he asked, holding up a mud-caked object. Katherine's heart leaped as she hurried over. Though damaged and water-stained, the box was unmistakable her father's handiwork, the carved roses still visible beneath the mud. With trembling fingers she opened it, praying the contents had somehow survived. Inside, protected by the box's tight joinery, lay her mother's locket, tarnished but intact. Beside it, sealed in an oilskin pouch her father had insisted on as extra protection, was the deed to the land, the ink smeared but legible. "Oh, thank God," she breathed, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. She opened the locket, revealing the small tintype photographs of her parents on their wedding day. "Thank you, Samuel. This means more than I can say," he nodded, seemingly embarrassed by her gratitude. "Just luck," he said gruffly. "The box must have caught against the tree during the flood." Katherine impulsively reached out and squeezed his hand. "Not luck, providence." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a moment of connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. Samuel was the first to look away, clearing his throat and suggesting they continue their salvage efforts. By late afternoon, they had recovered enough materials to fill a small cart, which Samuel promised to bring the next day. As they prepared to leave, Katherine stood in the center of what had been her home, turning slowly to take in the full panorama of the land. "I'll need to rebuild closer to that rise," she said, pointing to a gentle slope about 50 yards from the original cabin site. "Higher ground away from the creek's new path." Samuel nodded approvingly. "Smart. The soil looks good there too for a garden." Katherine smiled, feeling a spark of hope for the first time since the flood. I was thinking the same thing. The morning sun would hit it just right. As they rode back to the Diamond K, Catherine's mind raced with plans and calculations. She would need lumber, nails, help with the heavy work. Her savings might cover materials, but labor would be expensive, especially with spring planting approaching. "You're thinking awfully hard over there," Samuel observed as the ranch came into view. Catherine sighed. "Just trying to figure out how to make my dollars stretch far enough to rebuild." Samuel was quiet for a moment. The Diamond K lost some fence lines, but nothing serious. Most of the other ranches in the area fared similarly. People will be looking to help those who lost more. "I don't take charity," Catherine said firmly. "It's not charity to accept help from neighbors," Samuel countered. "Out here, everyone needs a hand sometimes. The Durango community takes care of its own." Catherine considered his words. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford right now, not if she wanted to rebuild before summer. "I suppose you're right," she conceded, "but I'll work for any help I receive. I'm not afraid of hard labor." Samuel's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "I noticed." At the Grants' house, Martha fussed over Catherine's sunburned nose and insisted she rest before dinner. Catherine instead helped prepare the meal, finding comfort in the domestic routine. As they worked side by side, Martha shared stories of her 30 years in Durango, including how she'd met Elijah after coming west as a mail-order bride. "I was terrified," Martha confessed as she rolled out pie crust. "Left everything I knew in Boston to marry a stranger in a wild territory. My parents thought I'd lost my mind." "What made you do it?" Catherine asked, slicing apples with practiced efficiency. Martha smiled, her eyes distant with memory. "Adventure partly, but mostly desperation. I was 26, considered firmly on the shelf in Boston society. My parents had died, leaving me with a respectable name but little money. When I saw Elijah's advertisement, honest rancher seeks educated, hard-working wife, something just felt right. And was it? Right, I mean. Oh, we had our struggles. The first winter nearly broke me. But Elijah was patient and kind. Love grew from respect and shared work." Martha glanced toward the window where her husband could be seen talking with Samuel near the corral. 30 years later, I can't imagine any other life." Catherine followed Martha's gaze, finding her eyes drawn to Samuel's tall figure. "Samuel mentioned he understands what it's like to lose everything. What did he mean by that?" Martha's expression grew somber. "That's his story to tell if he chooses. But I will say that man has seen more than his share of hardship. Elijah hired him 8 years ago when he drifted into town with nothing but his horse and the clothes on his back. Never met anyone with such a way with horses or such demons haunting him." Before Catherine could inquire further, Samuel and Elijah entered the kitchen, bringing with them the scent of hay and leather. Dinner conversation focused on rebuilding plans, with Elijah offering practical suggestions about lumber sources and construction methods. "Jim Peterson owes me for helping with his cattle drive last fall," Elijah mused. "He's got a small sawmill operation, might be willing to provide lumber at cost. And the Wilcox boys are handy with construction," Martha added. "Their farm wasn't hit badly. They might spare a few days to help." Catherine felt overwhelmed by their generosity. "I don't know how I'll ever repay such kindness." "That's not how it works out here," Elijah said simply. "You'll help someone else when their time of need comes. That's payment enough." After dinner, Catherine joined Samuel on the porch again, drawn to his quiet presence. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky. "Thank you for today," she said softly. "Seeing the land, finding my mother's locket, it means more than I can express." Samuel nodded, his profile strong against the night sky. Tomorrow we'll bring the cart for the salvaged materials. I've spoken with some of the hands. Several have offered to help with the rebuilding when their regular duties allow. Why are you doing this? Katherine asked, the question that had been lingering in her mind all day finally finding voice. You barely know me. Samuel was silent for so long that Katherine thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and tinged with an emotion she couldn't quite identify. 8 years ago, I lost everything in a different kind of flood, one made of blood and betrayal rather than water. He paused, his hands tightening on his hat brim. I was riding with a group of men thought they were friends. Turns out they were planning to rob the Silverton Bank. When I refused to participate, they left me for dead in a ravine with a bullet in my side. Katherine gasped softly, but didn't interrupt. Elijah found me, brought me here, gave me work when I healed. No questions asked, no judgment. Samuel turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting starlight. Sometimes a person needs a chance to rebuild, Katherine. Not just structures, but themselves. The weight of his confession hung between them, creating a bridge of understanding that transcended their short acquaintance. In that moment, Katherine felt a connection to Samuel Kincaid that went deeper than gratitude for her rescue, a recognition of kindred spirits, both rebuilding from devastation. I think I understand, she said finally. And I'm grateful not just for the help, but for the chance to start again. Samuel nodded, seemingly relieved by her response. We'll start at dawn tomorrow. Best get some rest. As Katherine watched him walk toward the bunkhouse, she realized that the flood that had destroyed her home had also, paradoxically, brought this extraordinary man into her life. For the first time since the waters had risen, she felt a different kind of current, one of hope, possibility, and perhaps something more. True to his word, the following weeks saw remarkable progress on Katherine's new cabin. Samuel arrived each morning with materials, tools, and often additional hands from neighboring ranches. The community's response had been overwhelming once word spread of Katherine's situation. Help materialized from unexpected sources. Jim Peterson not only provided lumber at cost, but threw in extra boards for good measure. The Wilcox brothers spent 3 full days helping set the foundation and frame the walls. Even Martha contributed, organizing a group of local women to sew new curtains, quilts, and linens to replace those lost in the flood. Katherine worked alongside the men from dawn until dusk, proving her claim that she wasn't afraid of hard labor. She could drive a nail true, saw a board straight, and lift her share of the weight. Samuel found himself increasingly impressed by her determination and skill. Your father taught you well, he commented one afternoon as they worked together on the cabin's roof. Katherine smiled, wiping sweat from her brow. He believed a woman should know how to do everything a man could do, especially on the frontier, said there might not always be someone around to help. Samuel handed her another shingle. Wise man. He would have liked you, Katherine said, not looking up from her work. He valued competence and straightforwardness above all else. Something warm and unfamiliar expanded in Samuel's chest at her words. He had grown accustomed to the respect of other men for his skills with horses and cattle. But Katherine's approval touched him differently. By the 3rd week of May, the cabin was taking shape, smaller than her original home but sturdier, built on higher ground with a proper stone foundation. Katherine had insisted on large windows to capture the mountain views, and Samuel had added the practical touch of storm shutters that could be closed securely. As they worked side by side, a comfortable rhythm developed between them. Samuel found himself sharing stories he'd never told anyone about his childhood in Missouri, his parents who died of cholera when he was 12, the years spent working his way west from ranch to ranch, learning the ways of horses and cattle. Katherine, in turn, told him of her life in Pennsylvania, her mother's gentle guidance, and her father's dreams of building a legacy in the West. She spoke of the year since his death, living alone on the homestead, determined to make his vision reality. "Weren't you afraid?" Samuel asked one evening as they sat by a small fire outside the partially completed cabin, eating a simple supper of beans and biscuits. Living alone out here, Katherine considered the question seriously. Not afraid exactly, lonely sometimes, but this land. She gestured to the surrounding vista, where the setting sun gilded the distant mountains. "It's like having a constant companion. I never felt truly alone here." Samuel understood. He'd felt the same connection to the land since coming west, a sense of belonging he'd never experienced in the crowded cities of his youth. "What about you?" Katherine asked, her voice soft in the gathering dusk. "You've been at the Diamond K for 8 years. Do you consider it home?" The question caught Samuel off guard. "I suppose," he said slowly. "The grants have been good to me, the work suits me." "But," she prompted, sensing his hesitation. Samuel poked at the fire, watching sparks rise into the darkening sky. "But it's not mine," he admitted finally. "Elijah's getting older. His son will take over eventually, bring his own ideas, his own foreman maybe." Katherine nodded, understanding in her eyes. "You want something of your own. Been saving," Samuel said, surprising himself with the confession. He rarely spoke of his private hopes. "Got my eye on a small spread north of here. Nothing fancy, but good grazing land, year-round water. You should do it," Katherine said with conviction. "Life's too uncertain to postpone dreams." Samuel looked at her, then really looked, and felt something shift inside him. In the firelight, with her hair loose around her shoulders and her eyes reflecting the flames, she was beautiful in a way that transcended mere appearance. Her strength, determination, and insight drew him like a compass to true north. The moment was broken by the distant howl of a coyote, reminding them of the late hour. Samuel stood, gathering their dishes. "Should get you back to the Grants. Early start tomorrow." Katherine rose as well, brushing dust from her skirt. "Actually, I was thinking of staying here tonight. The roof is complete, the walls are solid. The floor may be bare boards, but I have my bedroll." Samuel frowned. "It's not proper, you being out here alone." Katherine raised an eyebrow. "I lived alone for a year before the flood, Samuel. I'm not afraid of my own property." "It's different now," he insisted. "After the flood, with the cabin not fully secure, it has a door with a good latch," she countered. "And I have my father's rifle." She softened her tone. "I appreciate your concern, truly, but this is my land. I need to reclaim it properly." Samuel recognized the determination in her voice. Arguing would be futile. "At least let me check the perimeter before I go," he conceded. After ensuring the cabin was as secure as possible and leaving her with extra lantern oil and matches, Samuel reluctantly mounted his horse. "I'll be back at dawn," he said. "If anything happens, I'll be fine, Samuel," Katherine interrupted gently. "Go. Get some rest." As he rode away, Samuel found himself glancing back repeatedly until the glow of her lantern disappeared from view. The protective instinct she stirred in him went beyond his usual sense of responsibility. Something about Katherine Abernathy had gotten under his skin, into his thoughts in a way no woman ever had. That night, Katherine lay in her bedroll on the new cabin's floor, listening to the familiar sounds of her land, the distant murmur of the creek in its new path, the soft hooting of an owl, the whisper of wind through the pines. Despite the bare surroundings, she felt a profound sense of homecoming. Her thoughts turned to Samuel, as they increasingly did in quiet moments. His steady presence had become a constant in her life these past weeks, his quiet strength a foundation she hadn't known she needed. She admired his skill, his integrity, the way he treated everyone with the same direct respect. But there was something more developing, a warmth that spread through her whenever he was near, a quickening of her pulse when their hands accidentally touched while working. Katherine had never been one for romantic notions, had always expected to live independently on her father's land. Yet Samuel Kincaid made her wonder if a different future might be possible. She fell asleep with these thoughts, only to be awakened before dawn by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Grabbing her father's rifle, Katherine moved cautiously to the window, relaxing only when she recognized Samuel's distinctive silhouette in the pre-dawn light. Opening the door, she found him dismounting, leading a second horse laden with supplies. "Samuel, is something wrong? It's barely light." He looked momentarily taken aback by her appearance, hair loose around her shoulders, father's oversized shirt serving as a nightgown over her undergarments. He quickly averted his eyes. "Thought you might want to get an early start on the interior work. Brought some supplies." Katherine smiled, touched by his thoughtfulness and amused by his discomfort. "Let me get dressed. I'll make coffee." By the time she had changed into her work clothes and started a small fire in the newly constructed stone fireplace, Samuel had unloaded the supplies boards for shelving. A small table and chair salvaged from the diamond Katikes storage, nails, tools, and canvas to cover the windows until proper glass could be installed. They worked together through the day, fitting shelves along one wall, building a simple bed frame and constructing a rough kitchen table. Their movements had developed a natural synchronicity, each anticipating the other's needs without words. "We make a good team," Katherine observed as they sat outside the cabin for their midday meal. Samuel nodded, a rare smile softening his features. "That we do." By late afternoon, the cabin had begun to feel like a home. It was smaller and simpler than her original dwelling, but somehow more purposeful, every element chosen with care rather than inherited or cobbled together. "I think that's enough for today," Samuel said, surveying their work with satisfaction. "The glass for the windows should arrive next week. Until then, the canvas will keep out the elements." Katherine ran her hand along a newly installed shelf. "I can't believe how much we've accomplished. 6 weeks ago, I thought I'd lost everything." "You've done the hard part," Samuel replied. "Takes courage to start again from nothing." Their eyes met, and the air between them seemed to change, charged with an awareness that had been building for weeks. Katherine took a step toward him, her heart suddenly racing. "Samuel," she began, not entirely sure what she wanted to say, only that something needed to be acknowledged. Before she could continue, the sound of approaching riders broke the moment. Through the open door, they saw 3 men on horseback approaching the cabin. Samuel's posture changed instantly, tension replacing the relaxed companionship of moments before. "Stay inside," he said quietly, moving to stand in the doorway. Katherine ignored the instruction, stepping up beside him. "This is my property," she reminded him. "I'll greet visitors myself." The riders drew closer, revealing themselves to be rough-looking men, trail-worn and hard-eyed. The leader, a heavy-set man with a graying beard, reined in his horse a few yards from the cabin. "Well now, what have we here?" he called, his gaze moving speculatively between Samuel and Katherine. "New homesteaders." "This is Miss Abernathy's property," Samuel replied, his voice neutral but with an underlying steel Katherine had never heard before. "Can we help you, gentlemen?" The bearded man's eyes narrowed slightly. "Kincaid, that you?" Samuel's face remained impassive. "Do I know you?" The stranger chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. "Might not remember me. I rode with Beckett's crew for a spell years back. Name's Harris." He gestured to his companions. "This here's Pike and Simmons. We're just passing through looking for work." Katherine felt Samuel stiffen beside her at the mention of Beckett, the name of the man who had led the gang that had betrayed him years ago. "Not much work here," Samuel said evenly. "Miss Abernathy lost her cabin in the flood. We're just rebuilding." Harris's gaze lingered on Katherine in a way that made her skin crawl. "Mighty neighborly of you, Kincaid. Always were a helpful sort." His tone suggested the words were far from complimentary. "If you're looking for work, the stage office in Durango might know of opportunities," Katherine interjected, her voice firm. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have much to do before sunset." Harris's expression hardened for a moment before he forced a smile. "Of course, madam. Didn't mean to intrude." He tipped his hat. "Maybe we'll see you in town, Kincaid. Catch up on old times." As the men rode away, Samuel remained tense, watching until they disappeared from view. When he finally turned to Katherine, his expression was grim. "I need to get you back to the Grants," he said, already moving to gather their tools. "What? Why? Who were those men?" Katherine demanded, following him around the cabin. Samuel paused, his hands tightening on a hammer. "Harris wasn't just part of Beckett's gang. He was Beckett's right-hand man. If he's in the area, it's not a coincidence." Katherine processed this information. "You think they're looking for you? After 8 years. Beckett went to prison for that bank robbery," Samuel explained, his voice tightly controlled. "Last I heard, he got 20 years. But men like that have long memories, especially for those they consider traitors." "But surely they wouldn't. They left me for dead once before, Katherine." Samuel's eyes met hers, the intensity in them silencing her objection. "I won't risk your safety. Until I know why they're here and what they want, you need to stay at the Grants." Katherine wanted to argue but recognized the genuine concern in his expression. "All right," she conceded, "but only for a few days. This is my home, Samuel. I won't be driven from it by fear." They rode to the Diamond K in uneasy silence, both lost in thought. When they arrived, Samuel immediately sought out Elijah, explaining the situation in low, urgent tones. Katherine was directed to the house, where Martha welcomed her with concerned hospitality. That evening, Katherine sat at the Grants' dinner table, only half listening to the conversation around her. Her mind kept returning to the look in Samuel's eyes when he'd recognized Harris, not fear exactly, but a wariness born of hard experience. After dinner, she found Samuel on the porch, his usual spot. He stood rather than sat, his posture alert as he scanned the darkened landscape. "You're really worried," she observed, moving to stand beside him. Samuel didn't look at her, continuing his vigilant survey of the property. "Men like Harris and Beckett don't forget or forgive. If they're here, there's a reason." "What will you do?" Katherine asked quietly. Now he did turn to her, his expression resolute. "Find out what they want, then make sure they leave Durango for good." Katherine felt a chill at his words, not because she feared Samuel, but because she glimpsed the man he must have been before, capable of defending himself and others with whatever means necessary. "I won't let them disrupt the life you've built," she said firmly. "Or the cabin we've worked so hard on." Samuel's expression softened slightly. "Katherine, this isn't your fight. It became my fight when they showed up on my land," she countered. "Besides, She hesitated, unsure how to express the feelings that had been growing within her. "I care what happens to you, Samuel." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, confusion, perhaps a reflection of her own conflicted emotions. Before he could respond, Elijah joined them on the porch, his normally jovial face serious. "Sent word to Sheriff Davies," the older man said. "He'll keep an eye out for Harris and his men in town. Meanwhile, no one rides alone, especially you two." Samuel nodded, though Katherine could see he wasn't entirely comfortable with the restriction. "Harris mentioned looking for work. Might be they'll move on if they don't find any. Or might be they're just saying that, Elijah countered grimly. Either way, we stay alert until we know for certain. Katherine returned to her room that night with her thoughts in turmoil. The past 6 weeks had transformed her life in ways she never could have anticipated. The flood that had destroyed her home had also brought Samuel Kincaid into her life, a man whose quiet strength and integrity had become increasingly important to her. Now, just as the cabin was nearing completion and her new life taking shape, this shadow from his past threatened everything. Katherine fell asleep with her father's words echoing in her mind. The measure of a life well lived isn't the absence of storms, but how you navigate through them. The next morning brought news from town. Sheriff Davies had spotted Harris and his companions at the saloon, where they'd been asking questions about Samuel and the Diamond K Ranch. More concerning, they'd also been inquiring about recent bank deliveries and stagecoach schedules. "Sounds like they're planning something," Elijah said as they gathered in the ranch house kitchen. "Question is, does it involve you specifically, Samuel, or are they just looking for an opportunity?" Samuel's expression was grim. "Either way, we need to be prepared." For the next 3 days, Katherine found herself essentially confined to the ranch house, the men insisting it wasn't safe for her to return to her property alone. She helped Martha with household tasks and tried not to dwell on the sense of interruption. She felt as if her life had been put on hold, just as she was reclaiming it. On the afternoon of the 4th day, Katherine was hanging laundry in the yard when she spotted Samuel by the corral, working with a young horse. Without conscious thought, she found herself moving toward him, drawn by the graceful communication between man and animal. Samuel didn't use force or intimidation with the nervous colt. Instead, he moved with patient confidence, his body language and soft words gradually earning the animal's trust. It was beautiful to watch this taciturn man who struggled sometimes with human conversation, speaking so eloquently through subtle gestures and quiet persistence. When the colt finally allowed Samuel to place a saddle on its back without protest, he looked up and noticed Katherine watching. Something in his expression changed, softened as their eyes met across the yard. "That was remarkable," Katherine said as she approached the corral fence. "I've never seen anyone gentle a horse that quickly." Samuel shrugged, though she could tell he was pleased by her observation. "It's not about speed. It's about building trust. The horse has to believe you won't hurt him, that you're offering partnership, not domination." "Is that how you see relationships with people too?" The question slipped out before Katherine could consider its implications. Samuel looked startled, then thoughtful. "Never considered it that way, but I suppose so." He ran a hand along the colt's neck. "Though horses are often more straightforward than people," Katherine smiled. "Less complicated motivations." "Exactly." He secured the colt in its stall and joined her at the fence. "Any news from town?" She shook her head. "Not since this morning. Elijah says Sheriff Davies is keeping close watch on Harris and his men. They haven't left the hotel except to visit the saloon." Samuel's jaw tightened. "They're waiting for something, or someone." "You think Beckett might be joining them?" Katherine asked, voicing the fear that had been growing since Harris's appearance. "It's possible. His sentence could have been reduced for good behavior." Samuel's expression was unreadable. "Either way, I can't keep hiding here while they plan whatever they're planning." Alarm coursed through Katherine. "What are you saying?" "I'm riding into town tomorrow," Samuel said, his decision clearly already made. "Time to find out what they want and deal with it one way or another." "That's too dangerous," Katherine protested. "If they're looking for revenge, better to face it directly than wait for them to bring trouble to the Diamond K," he interrupted. "Or to your new cabin." Katherine realized he was right, though the thought of him confronting these men from his past terrified her. In the short time she'd known Samuel Kincaid, he had become essential to her in ways she was only beginning to understand. "Let me come with you," she said impulsively. Samuel's response was immediate and firm. "Absolutely not. Listen to me," Katherine insisted. "Harris saw me at the cabin. If they're watching you, they already know I'm connected to you somehow." She chose her words carefully, unsure how to define what existed between them. Besides, they might be less likely to start trouble with a woman present. Samuel shook his head, but she could see he was considering her logic. "It's too risky." "Everything worth doing carries risk," Katherine countered. "My father taught me that. He also taught me to face problems head-on." Their eyes locked in silent debate, neither willing to yield. Finally, Samuel sighed. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met." Katherine smiled, knowing she'd won. "I believe that's what they call frontier spirit, Mr. Kincaid." The next morning they rode into Durango together, despite Elijah and Martha's protests. The town was busy with its usual activity, wagons delivering goods to the general store, cowboys from nearby ranches gathering at the saloon, ladies shopping or visiting the post office for mail. They tied their horses at the hitching post outside the sheriff's office, where Davies greeted them with a concerned frown. "Heard you were coming, Kincaid," the lawman said, rising from his desk. "Not sure it's wise with those three asking about you." "That's precisely why I'm here," Samuel replied. "Where are they now?" "Saloon, most likely. Been there every day since they arrived." Davies stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "Haven't caused any trouble yet, but they make me uneasy, like wolves watching a henhouse." "Any word on whether Beckett might be joining them?" Samuel asked, confirming Katherine's suspicion that this had been his primary concern. Davies shook his head. "Nothing specific, but there was a telegram for Harris yesterday. After he read it, they started drinking more heavily." Celebrating something, seemed like. Samuel and Katherine exchanged a glance, both thinking the same thing. Harris had received news that Beckett was on his way. "What's your plan?" Davies asked. "Can't arrest men for asking questions or having a bad reputation." "No plan yet," Samuel admitted. "Just want to see them for myself, gauge their intentions." The sheriff looked skeptical. "And Miss Abernathy's role in this reconnaissance?" "Moral support," Katherine replied before Samuel could answer. "And a civilizing influence, hopefully." Davies didn't appear convinced, but he didn't argue further. "I'll keep an eye on things from a distance. Don't want to provoke anything, but I won't have trouble in my town either." They left the sheriff's office and walked down the main street toward the Silverado saloon. Katherine was acutely aware of the glances. They drew a respectable woman, and a known ranch foreman entering an establishment primarily frequented by miners and cowboys was bound to cause speculation. Inside, the saloon was dimly lit and smelled of stale beer and tobacco smoke. Despite the early hour, several tables were occupied, mostly by men playing cards or nursing drinks. In the far corner sat Harris and his two companions, engaged in low conversation. The room quieted as Katherine and Samuel entered, curious eyes following their progress to the bar. The bartender, a heavy-set man with an impressive mustache, raised his eyebrows in silent question. "Coffee, if you have it," Samuel requested. "For both of us." As the bartender moved to fulfill their order, Harris looked up from his table, his eyes narrowing as he recognized them. A slow, unpleasant smile spread across his face as he rose and approached the bar. "Well, well. Kincaid and his lady friend," Harris said, his voice carrying in the now silent room. "Heard you were asking about us, so we've been asking about you too." Samuel turned to face him, his posture relaxed but alert. Just curious why old associates of Beckett's would show up in Durango after all these years. Harris's smile didn't reach his eyes. Coincidence, maybe. Or maybe we heard this was good country for a fresh start. Seems to have worked out well for you. His gaze shifted to Katherine. Very well indeed. Katherine met his stare evenly, refusing to be intimidated. Mr. Kincaid was kind enough to help me rebuild after the flood destroyed my home. The people of Durango look after their own. Is that what you are now, Kincaid? One of Durango's own? Harris asked, mockery in his tone. Respectable rancher, upstanding citizen, knight in shining armor for ladies in distress. Samuel's expression remained neutral, though Katherine could sense the tension in him. I'm a working man who's found a place that suits him, he replied evenly. Nothing more complicated than that. Harris chuckled, the sound sending a chill down Katherine's spine. We all change, I suppose. Time was when you rode with a different crowd, had different aspirations. People grow up, Samuel said. Learn from mistakes. Some mistakes can't be outrun, Harris countered, his friendly facade slipping to reveal something harder beneath. No matter how far you ride or how many years pass, the threat in his words was unmistakable. Katherine felt a surge of protectiveness toward Samuel, who had risked everything to help her rebuild her life. Mr. Harris, she said, her voice clear in the hushed saloon, whatever history you share with Mr. Kincaid is in the past. He's a respected member of this community now, with friends who value him highly. Harris's eyes moved to her, cold and calculating. Pretty speech, Miss Abernathy, but you don't know the man you're defending, not really. I know enough, Katherine replied steadily. I know he risked his life to save mine during the flood. I know he's worked alongside me every day since to help me rebuild. And I know he's a man of integrity, which is more than I can say for someone who makes veiled threats in public establishments. A murmur ran through the saloon at her words. Several of the local men straightened in their chairs, their attention fully on the confrontation now. Harris seemed to notice the shift in atmosphere, the subtle closing of ranks around Katherine and Samuel. His smile returned, though his eyes remained cold. No threats intended, madam. Just reminiscing with an old riding partner. He tipped his hat with exaggerated courtesy. Enjoy your coffee. As Harris returned to his table, the bartender placed 2 steaming cups before them. On the house, he said quietly. Any friend of the Diamond K is a friend of mine. Samuel nodded his thanks, though his eyes remained on Harris and his companions, who had resumed their conversation in low, urgent tones. We should go, he said after they had finished their coffee. We've learned what we came to learn. Outside, in the bright Colorado sunshine, Katherine took a deep breath of fresh air, grateful to be away from the tense atmosphere of the saloon. What did we learn exactly? She asked as they walked back toward their horses. Samuel's expression was grim. That Harris isn't here by chance. The way he spoke, the things he implied, he's here for me specifically. But why now, after 8 years? I'm not sure. But that telegram the sheriff mentioned, I'd wager it was confirmation that Beckett is on his way. Samuel stopped, turning to face her directly. Katherine, I want you to stay in town with Martha's sister while I sort this out. Katherine shook her head firmly. No, I'm not hiding while you face this danger alone. This isn't your fight, Samuel insisted, echoing his words from days earlier. You made it my fight when you rode through that flood to save me, Katherine countered. When you helped me rebuild my home and my life. We're in this together now, Samuel, whether you like it or not. Their eyes locked, a silent battle of wills that Katherine was determined not to lose. Finally, Samuel sighed, a sound of equal parts frustration and admiration. You really are the most stubborn woman I've ever met, he said, His tone softer than his words, Katherine smiled, reaching impulsively to squeeze his hand. "And you're stuck with me, Mr. Kincaid. So we might as well figure out how to handle this situation together." Something shifted in Samuel's eyes, a recognition, perhaps, of the truth in her words. They were connected now, their lives intertwined in ways that went beyond neighborly assistance or even friendship. "All right," he conceded. "But we do this carefully. No unnecessary risks." As they mounted their horses to return to the Diamond K, Katherine felt a curious mixture of fear and determination. The threat posed by Harris and his companions was real, potentially deadly. Yet facing it alongside Samuel felt right, essential even. The flood that had nearly claimed her life had also brought her to this moment. This partnership with a man who had become more important to her than she could have imagined possible. Whatever came next, they would face it together. News arrived the following day via a telegram from the sheriff in Silverton. Jake Beckett had indeed been released from prison 3 months earlier, his sentence reduced for good behavior. More concerning, he had been seen boarding a train bound for Durango just 2 days prior. "He'll be here by tomorrow," Elijah said grimly as they gathered in the ranch house. "Question is, what's his plan?" Samuel's face was set in hard lines. "Revenge, most likely. I was the key witness at his trial. My testimony sent him to prison. But surely after 8 years." Martha began, her voice trailing off as she saw the expression on Samuel's face. "Men like Beckett don't forget," Samuel said quietly. "Prison gives them nothing but time to nurse grudges and plan retribution." Katherine, sitting beside Martha at the table, felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. "What do? "We don't wait for them to make the first move," Elijah declared. "Samuel, I'm riding into town with you tomorrow to meet the train. Sheriff Davies will be with us. 3 against 4 are better odds than facing them alone later." Samuel nodded, though Katherine could see he was troubled by the thought of involving others in his personal battle. "I'm coming too," she said firmly. "Absolutely not," Samuel and Elijah responded in unison. Katherine crossed her arms. "I wasn't asking permission. If you're confronting Beckett, I want to be there." Seeing Samuel about to protest, she continued quickly, "Not to participate in any confrontation, but to be a witness. The more respectable citizens present, the less likely they are to start trouble in public." The men exchanged glances, clearly not happy with her logic but unable to refute it entirely. "She has a point," Martha said unexpectedly. "Beckett's less likely to try something with ladies present." "I'll come too." Elijah looked scandalized. "Martha, this isn't a social occasion. These are dangerous men who are less likely to be dangerous with witnesses," Martha interrupted smoothly. "Besides, I need to pick up fabric from the mercantile. Might as well combine errands." Katherine bit back a smile at the older woman's practical approach. After further discussion, a compromise was reached. Katherine and Martha would accompany them to town but would remain in the mercantile across from the train station, safely out of direct confrontation but close enough to observe. That night, Katherine found sleep elusive. Her mind kept returning to the confrontation in the saloon, to the cold hatred in Harris's eyes when he looked at Samuel. These men were truly dangerous, not the typical rough characters one might encounter in a frontier town, but men with specific, calculated malice. Unable to rest, she rose and wrapped herself in a shawl, intending to sit on the porch for fresh air. To her surprise, she found Samuel already there, similarly sleepless, staring out at the moonlit landscape. "You should be resting," he said without turning, somehow knowing it was her. "So should you," Katherine replied, settling into the chair beside him. "But I suspect sleep is equally elusive for both of us tonight." Samuel nodded, his profile strong and serious in the moonlight. I keep thinking about all the ways tomorrow could go wrong. And I keep thinking about all the ways it could go right, Katherine countered. Beckett might not even show up, or if he does, seeing you with the sheriff and Elijah might convince him to move on. You're an optimist, Samuel observed, a hint of fondness in his voice. Someone has to be, Katherine replied. Besides, I refuse to believe that the same providence that sent you through that flood to save me would allow these men to harm you now. Samuel turned to look at her fully then, something vulnerable in his expression. Katherine, if things go badly tomorrow, they won't, she interrupted firmly. But if they do, he persisted, I want you to know that these past weeks helping you rebuild have been important to me. He struggled with the words, emotions clearly not coming easily to this reserved man. You've reminded me of things I'd forgotten, how it feels to build something worthwhile, to have purpose beyond just getting through each day. Katherine's heart quickened at his words, at the rare openness in his expression. Samuel, let me finish, he said gently. Before the flood, I was just existing, doing my job well but not really living. When I saw your cabin being torn apart by the water, something changed. I knew I had to reach you, had to try, even if it meant risking everything. He took a deep breath. What I'm trying to say, poorly, is that you saved me too, Katherine, in a different way. The confession hung in the air between them, weighted with significance. Katherine felt tears prick at her eyes, moved by the raw honesty of his words. Samuel Kincaid, she said softly, reaching to take his hand. We saved each other, and will continue to do so starting tomorrow. I refuse to accept any other outcome. His fingers tightened around hers, the simple contact conveying more than words could express. They sat together in companionable silence, until the eastern sky began to lighten, the approaching dawn bringing with it both apprehension and hope for the confrontation to come. The train from Silverton was scheduled to arrive at 11:42 a.m. By 11, Samuel, Elijah, and Sheriff Davies had positioned themselves on the platform, while Katherine and Martha browsed fabric at the mercantile across the street, their attention more on the window than the bolts of cloth before them. Harris and his companions arrived at the station minutes later, confirming that they were indeed expecting Beckett. They took up positions at the far end of the platform, occasionally casting glances toward Samuel and his allies. As the train whistle sounded in the distance, announcing its approach, tension thickened in the air. Katherine found herself gripping Martha's arm, her heart pounding as the massive steam engine pulled into the station in a cloud of smoke and noise. Passengers began to disembark, a young family, several businessmen, a group of miners. Then, stepping down from the second passenger car, came a tall figure in a black coat. Even from a distance, Katherine could see the hard set of his features, the purposeful way he scanned the platform until his gaze settled on Samuel. Jake Beckett had arrived in Durango. Time seemed to slow as Beckett walked toward his waiting men, his eyes never leaving Samuel. Harris stepped forward, greeting his former leader with a quick handshake before gesturing toward where Samuel stood with Elijah and the sheriff. I don't like this, Martha murmured. They look too confident. Katherine nodded, sharing the older woman's concern. Despite being outnumbered, Beckett and his men showed no sign of intimidation. If anything, they appeared amused by the welcoming committee. Outside, Sheriff Davies stepped forward, positioning himself between the two groups. Words were exchanged that Katherine couldn't hear, but the body language was clear enough. The sheriff was laying down the law, while Beckett responded with exaggerated politeness. Then, to Katherine's alarm, Beckett stepped around the sheriff and approached Samuel directly. Though she couldn't hear the words, she could see the cold smile on Beckett's face, the tension in Samuel's shoulders as they spoke. "I need to get closer," Katherine said suddenly, moving toward the door. "Katherine, wait," Martha began, but Katherine was already outside, crossing the street with determined strides. As she approached the platform, she caught fragments of the conversation. "Thought 8 years might have mellowed you, Kincaid," Beckett was saying, his voice carrying a dangerous edge beneath its casual tone. "But here you are, still hiding behind badges and respectability." "I'm not hiding," Samuel replied evenly. "Just making it clear that Durango isn't a good place for your particular talents, Beckett." Beckett chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. "Always the righteous one, weren't you? Too good to ride with us, too quick to judge." His expression hardened. "Too eager to testify." "You were robbing a bank, Beckett," Samuel said flatly. "Someone would have died if it had gone wrong." "Someone did die," Beckett countered coldly. "My brother, shot by a trigger-happy teller during our hasty exit, an exit made necessary by your warning to the law." Katherine reached the edge of the platform in time to see the flicker of genuine regret cross Samuel's face. "I didn't know about your brother. I'm sorry for that." Beckett's eyes narrowed. "Sorry doesn't bring him back. Sorry doesn't give me back 8 years of my life." He leaned closer. "But I'll take something of equal value instead." Before anyone could react, Beckett's hand moved to his coat, and suddenly a pistol was aimed directly at Samuel's chest. Several women on the platform screamed and bystanders scattered for cover. "Beckett!" Sheriff Davies barked, his own weapon now drawn. "Drop it. You're outnumbered." Beckett smiled, never taking his eyes off Samuel. "Am I, Harris, show the good sheriff why that doesn't matter." To Katherine's horror, Harris pulled back his coat to reveal not just a pistol, but several sticks of dynamite strapped to his chest. "Anyone makes a move on Beckett," he called loudly, "and I'll take half the town with me." Panic erupted on the platform as people fled the station. Katherine found herself frozen in place, terrified yet unable to abandon Samuel to this nightmare scenario. "Now," Beckett continued conversationally, as if they were merely discussing the weather, "here's what's going to happen. Kincaid and I are going to take a little ride. We have unfinished business to discuss privately." "Not happening," Elijah growled, his own gun drawn despite the threat from Harris. Beckett shrugged. "Your choice. But I only need Kincaid, the rest of you are expendable." He gestured toward Harris. "One word from me, and Harris lights that fuse. How many innocent people are you willing to sacrifice for one man's life, Sheriff?" A tense silence fell over the platform. Katherine could see the sheriff's dilemma, his duty to protect the town warring with his instinct to stand by Samuel. "I'll go," Samuel said quietly. "No one else needs to get hurt." "Samuel, no," Elijah protested. "It's all right," Samuel assured him, though his eyes told a different story. "This was always my fight." As Samuel moved to stand beside Beckett, his gaze swept the area, finally landing on Katherine. Something passed between them in that moment: regret, apology, and something deeper that made Katherine's heart constrict painfully. Beckett noticed the exchange, his eyes tracking to Katherine with sudden interest. "Well, well, what have we here? The lady from the saloon." His smile widened unpleasantly. "Perhaps you should join us, miss. Ensure Kincaid's good behavior during our discussion." "Leave her out of this," Samuel said, his voice suddenly hard. "This is between you and me." "On the contrary," Beckett replied. "I'm quite curious about the woman who defended you so passionately. She clearly doesn't know what you really are." Katherine stepped forward, ignoring Martha's frantic gesture to stay back. "I know exactly who Samuel Kincaid is," she said clearly. "A man of honor and courage. More than I can say for men who threaten innocent people with dynamite." Beckett studied her with renewed interest. "Spirited. I see the appeal, Kincaid." He gestured with his gun. "Join us, miss." "Abernathy," Katherine supplied, moving closer despite Samuel's warning look. "Katherine Abernathy. Miss Abernathy," Beckett repeated. "Your presence will make our journey much more interesting." "Katherine, don't," Samuel pleaded. "This isn't your fight." She met his gaze steadily. "I believe we've had this conversation before, Mr. Kincaid. My decision hasn't changed." Beckett looked between them, amused by their exchange. "How touching. The lady insists on sharing your fate, Kincaid." He waved his gun toward the waiting horses. "Shall we?" As they moved toward the horses, Sheriff Davies called out, "Beckett, this isn't over. You won't get far." Beckett turned, his expression coldly confident. "I only need to get far enough, Sheriff. And remember, Harris stays here until we're safely away. Any attempt to follow us, and he'll ensure Durango remembers this day for generations to come." Katherine felt Samuel's hand brush against hers as they were directed toward the horses, a brief, reassuring contact that gave her courage. Whatever Beckett planned, they would face it together. They rode out of town under Beckett's watchful eye, his gun never far from Samuel's back. Katherine's mind raced, evaluating and discarding escape plans as quickly as they formed. Beckett was too experienced, too vigilant for any obvious attempt. Once Durango was behind them, Beckett directed them east, toward the more rugged terrain near the mountains. They rode for nearly 2 hours, the landscape growing increasingly wild and isolated. "Where are you taking us?" Samuel finally asked, breaking the tense silence. Beckett smiled thinly. "Somewhere private, somewhere with significance." Understanding dawned in Samuel's eyes. "The ravine." "Where you left me. Poetic, isn't it?" Beckett replied. "Returning to the scene of your betrayal." "You were planning to rob a bank," Samuel countered. "Innocent people would have been hurt. That wasn't what I signed on for." "You signed on to ride with us," Beckett said harshly. "That meant loyalty above all else." "Not above conscience," Samuel replied quietly. Beckett laughed without humor. "Conscience! Such a convenient word for cowardice." They continued in silence until reaching a steep, narrow ravine cutting through the foothills. Beckett gestured for them to dismount, directing them down a treacherous path to the bottom of the gorge. "This is it," he announced, his voice echoing slightly against the stone walls. "The exact spot where you were supposed to die, Kincaid, where I'll correct that mistake today." Katherine felt cold fear grip her heart, but she forced herself to remain calm. Panic would help no one now. "You don't have to do this," she said, addressing Beckett directly. "Killing him won't bring your brother back or restore the years you lost." Beckett turned his cold gaze on her. "True. But it will bring satisfaction, justice even." "This isn't justice," Samuel said. "Let Katherine go. She has nothing to do with what happened between us." "Oh, but she does now," Beckett replied. "She chose to involve herself. Besides, witnesses are inconvenient." Katherine moved closer to Samuel, drawing strength from his presence. "If you're going to kill us, at least tell me why you waited 8 years, she said, playing for time, hoping desperately that the sheriff had found a way to neutralize Harris and follow them. Beckett seemed amused by her question. "Prison has a way of forcing patience, Miss Abernathy. I had time to plan, to consider the most fitting retribution." He gestured around the ravine. "This place has meaning, symmetry." "And what about your men?" Samuel asked. "Harris is risking his life back in town, wearing dynamite for your revenge. Does he know you've left him as a sacrifice?" A flash of something doubt perhaps crossed Beckett's face before his cold mask returned. "Harris understands the risks. We all do." "Do you?" Katherine pressed. "Sheriff Davies won't let this stand. Even if you kill us, they'll hunt you down. You'll never be free." "Freedom is relative," Beckett replied philosophically. "I've already lost 8 years. What's a few more, or a lifetime even, if I balance the scales first?" As he spoke, he raised his gun, aiming deliberately at Samuel's chest. Katherine moved instinctively, placing herself partially between them. "Katherine, don't," Samuel said urgently, trying to push her aside. "How noble," Beckett commented, seeming genuinely intrigued by her action. "Are you willing to die for him, Miss Abernathy? A man you barely know." Katherine met his gaze steadily. "I know enough." Something shifted in Beckett's expression, not softening exactly, but a flicker of reluctant respect. "Step aside. My quarrel isn't with you." "It is now," Katherine replied firmly. "You can't hurt him without hurting me first." Beckett's gun remained raised, but uncertainty had entered his posture. His revenge fantasy clearly hadn't accounted for this complication, a woman willing to sacrifice herself for the man he hated. Behind them, the sound of loose rocks clattering down the ravine wall broke the tense tableau. Beckett's head snapped up, his gun swinging toward the source of the noise. In that moment of distraction, Samuel moved with explosive speed, tackling Katherine to the ground while simultaneously kicking out at Beckett's legs. The gun discharged, the bullet ricocheting harmlessly off stone as Beckett stumbled backward. "Run!" Samuel shouted to Katherine, grappling with Beckett for control of the weapon. Instead of fleeing, Katherine scrambled toward a fallen branch, hefting it like a club as she watched the two men struggle. When an opening presented itself, she swung with all her strength, connecting solidly with Beckett's shoulder. He howled in pain, momentarily loosening his grip on the gun. Samuel wrenched it free, quickly putting distance between them as he trained the weapon on his former associate. "It's over, Beckett," Samuel said, his breathing heavy from exertion. Beckett straightened, rubbing his injured shoulder, his expression shifting from rage to a strange, resigned amusement. "Is it? What now, Kincaid? You shoot me in cold blood." "Become exactly what you claimed you weren't 8 years ago." Samuel's grip on the gun remained steady, but Katherine could see the conflict in his eyes. "I should. You were going to kill us both." "Then do it," Beckett challenged. "Prove me right about you." For a tense moment, Katherine thought Samuel might actually pull the trigger. The history between these men went deeper than she had realized, touched wounds that had never properly healed. "No," Samuel said finally, lowering the gun slightly. "I'm not like you. Never was." Before Beckett could respond, the sound of approaching horses echoed through the ravine. Moments later, Sheriff Davies appeared at the top of the path, rifle in hand, with Elijah and several deputies behind him. "Kincaid, Miss Abernathy," the sheriff called. "You all right down there?" "We're fine," Samuel replied, his eyes never leaving Beckett. "How did you find us?" "Followed your trail," Davies answered, making his way carefully down the steep path. "Once we convinced Harris his boss had abandoned him, he was surprisingly cooperative about the likely direction." As the sheriff reached them, Samuel handed over Beckett's gun. "He was planning to kill us both, right where he left me for dead 8 years ago." Davies nodded grimly, producing handcuffs for Beckett. "Jake Beckett, you're under arrest for kidnapping, attempted murder, and conspiracy. You'll be heading back to prison for a good long while." As Beckett was secured and led away, Katherine found herself trembling, the delayed reaction to their ordeal finally setting in. Samuel moved to her side, his arm coming around her shoulders to steady her. "You all right?" he asked softly. Katherine nodded, then shook her head, then laughed shakily. "I don't know. Ask me tomorrow." Samuel's expression grew serious. "What you did stepping in front of his gun, that was the bravest and most foolish thing I've ever witnessed." "I couldn't just watch him kill you," Katherine replied simply. Something in Samuel's eyes shifted, softened. "Why?" Katherine knew the moment had come to give voice to the feelings that had been growing between them since the day he'd ridden through the flood to save her. "Because you've become essential to me, Samuel Kincaid," she said quietly. Like water, like air. I couldn't lose you when I've only just found you." For a heartbeat, Samuel seemed frozen by her words. Then, with gentle reverence, he raised one hand to cup her cheek. "Katherine Abernathy, you are the most remarkable woman I have ever known." When he kissed her, it felt like coming home, a sense of rightness, of completion that transcended the danger they had just survived. In the aftermath of violence, this moment of tenderness seemed all the more precious, all the more miraculous. "If you two are quite finished," Elijah called from above, amusement evident in his voice, "we should get back to town before dark." Katherine pulled away reluctantly, a blush warming her cheeks. Samuel smiled, a full, unreserved smile that transformed his serious features into something breathtaking. "We're coming," he called back, never taking his eyes from Katherine's face. More quietly, he added, "We have a cabin to finish building." "Yes," Katherine agreed, her heart full. "We certainly do." The story of the flood that had swept away Katherine Abernathy's cabin, of Samuel Kincaid's daring rescue, and of their confrontation with Jake Beckett quickly became local legend in Durango. People spoke of it in hushed, reverent tones in the saloon, elaborating certain details with each retelling until the tale took on almost mythical proportions. What wasn't exaggerated was the speed with which Katherine's new cabin was completed following their return. With Beckett and his men safely behind bars awaiting trial, the entire community seemed determined to help finish what Samuel had started. On a crisp June morning, just 7 weeks after the flood that had changed everything, Katherine stood on the porch of her completed cabin, watching the sunrise paint the mountains in gold and pink. The structure was solid and welcoming, larger than her original home, with a proper stone fireplace, glass windows, and sturdy furniture donated by various townspeople. The land itself was recovering too. New grass grew where floodwaters had scoured the earth. Katherine's surviving apple saplings had been carefully replanted and were showing promising new growth. The creek, now returned to its normal size, followed a slightly different path, but still provided the sweet, clear water that had first drawn her father to this place. As she sipped her morning coffee, Katherine heard the now familiar sound of hoofbeats approaching. Samuel had taken to riding over from the Diamond K each dawn, ostensibly to check on the cabin's settling and to help with remaining tasks around the property. Both knew these were merely excuses to spend time together, but neither felt any need to acknowledge the pretense. "Morning," Samuel called as he dismounted, looking more relaxed than Katherine had ever seen him. The shadows that had haunted his eyes since their first meeting had diminished, replaced by something that looked remarkably like contentment. "Coffee's hot," she replied, smiling as he climbed the porch steps to join her. They stood side by side, watching the day brighten across the land. After a comfortable silence, Samuel cleared his throat, suddenly seeming nervous. "I spoke with Elijah yesterday," he said, his voice carefully casual. "About that property north of the Diamond K I've had my eye on." Katherine's heart quickened. "Oh." "He's agreed to loan me the difference between my savings and the asking price." Samuel turned to face her fully. "It's good land, Katherine. 70 acres with year-round water and enough meadow for decent grazing. The cabin needs work, but it's sound." "It sounds perfect," she said softly, understanding the significance of this conversation. Samuel nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "It could be, but there's something I need to ask you first." Katherine set down her coffee cup, her hands suddenly unsteady. "Yes." "These past weeks, helping you rebuild, facing Beckett together, they've shown me what's possible. What life could be with the right partner." He took a deep breath. "I'm not a man of fancy words, Katherine, but I love you." I think I started falling for you the moment I pulled you from that flood and felt you breathing against me." Tears blurred Catherine's vision as Samuel took her hands in his. "I know it's fast," he continued. "We've known each other barely 2 months. But when you've spent years just existing and suddenly find yourself truly living again, you don't want to waste a single day." He squeezed her hands gently. "Katherine Abernathy, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Of building a life together on that land north of here?" Katherine didn't hesitate. "Yes," she breathed, joy bubbling up within her like a spring. "Yes, Samuel Kincaid, I will marry you." His smile was brilliant as he drew her into his arms, sealing their promise with a kiss that spoke of shared dreams and future dawns. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Diamond K, with the Grants, Sheriff Davies, and half the town in attendance. Katherine wore a new blue dress that Martha had helped her sew, with her mother's locket restored to its proper place around her neck. Samuel, almost unrecognizable in his Sunday best, couldn't take his eyes off her throughout the ceremony. After a celebration that lasted well into the evening, the newlyweds rode to their new property, the Double K Ranch, as they had decided to call it, combining their initials. The cabin awaited them, freshly cleaned and stocked with supplies by Martha and other well-wishers. As Samuel carried her across the threshold, Katherine felt a sense of completion, of having found her place in the world after nearly losing everything. The flood that had destroyed her father's cabin had also brought her to this moment, this man, this future full of promise. Over the years that followed, the Double K prospered under their joint stewardship. Samuel's expertise with horses led to a successful breeding operation, while Katherine's knowledge of crops and gardening ensured they were largely self-sufficient. They added onto the cabin as their family grew, first with the arrival of their son, James, named for Katherine's father, and 2 years later, a daughter they called Elizabeth, after Samuel's mother. Every spring, when the creek swelled with snowmelt, they would tell their children the story of the flood that had brought them together, of how their father had ridden through the current to rescue their mother, offering shelter when all seemed lost. "I'm your shelter now," Samuel would say, reaching for Katherine's hand as they watched their children play on land that had flourished under their care. And Katherine, looking at the family they had built together, would always reply, "And I am yours." In the wild heart of Colorado, where nature's fury had once threatened to take everything, they had found something precious and enduring, a love as steady as the mountains, as life-giving as water, and as essential as the shelter they had built together from the ruins of devastation.